Hi, Archie.
How are you today?
I am fantastic. How are you?
Fantastic.
Isn't that a great fun word? You look like a banana. You look like you're wearing a banana costume.
The Bluetooth bubble.
That reminds me of the story you read about the person who ate all of those books. Now you are a blinking banana. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen so that we can start our new story today.
Jigsaw Jones.
Jigsaw Jones. Okay, a great story for October. We're not quite in October yet, but we're close. What are you going to be for Halloween this year? Are you going trick-or-treating?
Yeah.
Do you know what you want to dress up as?
Oh, I know. The Curious Monkey George.
Curious George. Yes. The monkey, Curious George. That will be great. Now, who is going to be the man with the yellow hat?
Me.
Well, are you going to be the man with the yellow hat, or are you going to be Curious George?
I'm going to be the Haunted Scarecrow.
The Haunted Scarecrow. The Case of the Haunted Scarecrow. This is a Jigsaw Jones mystery. And you and I have already started this story. We started it, a long time ago, and we only read a few pages.
Maybe, maybe 5 months a year ago. Maybe 5 months.
Maybe 5 months ago.
Yeah.
We are in the 9th month, so 9 minus 5 would be 4. That would be the 4th month, which is April.
Or May.
Yeah, April or May. That is a possibility. But we're going to go ahead and start it from the beginning. So today will be a little bit of a review for us. Here's our table of contents. This is a chapter book, and there are 11 chapters in it. And here is the first page of chapter 1.
I think last time we started when Jigsaw Jones was maybe Jigsaw Jones. I forgot.
That's okay. Well, you and I know something that our other listeners don't know yet. So I am going to give them a clue that you already know, or a hint. And here is that hint. Anytime we start reading a new story, one of the very first things we need to do is figure out who is telling the story. And when they're telling the story, one of the first things they will tell us is about the setting and the characters. So we will be able to answer some questions like, where are they, when is it, and who is in the story. So we will be looking for the answers to the questions where, when, and who. But someone is giving us that information. Someone is telling the story to us, and we need to find out who that is. In most stories, the person telling the story is not in the story, and we call that person the narrator. So I'm going to go ahead and write down the word narrator right here. So the narrator would be the person telling the story. And this person is not in the story. And so he will be talking about the characters. And when he's talking about the characters and telling us what they're doing, he will use pronouns and tell us what he is doing or she is doing or they are doing. But sometimes a character in the story is the one telling the story. And there is a way that we can figure that out pretty quickly. And it's by looking at the pronouns that are not in quotation marks. So I want to show you what I mean by that. All right, so let me see. How about I'll use green. So when we're talking about pronouns, we can divide them into 3 groups. And I'm going to call this group number 1, and this one will be group number 2, and this one will be group number 3. Now, I said that if a narrator is telling the story, he is going to, the narrator, we don't really think of the narrator as a he or a she. It's just someone who is not in the story. But that person telling the story will talk about the characters as being a he for a boy character, or a she for a girl character, or an it. That's if they're talking about one person. If they're talking about more than one person, then they would say they. So those are the pronouns that are used if we are talking about someone else. But there's other pronouns that we use when we are having a conversation. So when you and I are talking, when 2 people are talking to each other and having a conversation, then we use pronouns I and you. So if I'm the one talking, I say I. And when I'm talking to you, I call you, you. So when we're having a conversation, and if I'm the one talking, I am the first person. And I am talking to you, you are the second person in the conversation. And there are 2 of us in the conversation. So we call that first person is the one talking, and that person says I. And second person is the second person in the conversation, the one that I am talking to, and that is you. Now, when you talk back to me, you become person number 1, and you say I, and I become person number 2, the person you are talking to, and you call me you, right? Every day you say, how are you? And you are talking to me. And so in that question, I am the you. So we call this pronoun first person, and we call this pronoun second person. And that's because we use these 2 pronouns when we are talking. And when we are talking, we are always talking to somebody. So we are having a conversation with someone. There's always someone talking, that's the first person, and always there is someone they are talking to, that's the second person. So we use first and second person when we are speaking, when we are talking. Well, if you think about it, if there's a character in the story who's telling the story, they are going to say I, and they are talking to us, the reader. They are telling the story to us. So we, the readers, become the person they're talking to. And so we would be you. So we can look for the pronoun I in the story. And if we see it and it's not in quotation marks, then we know that one of the characters in the story is the one telling the story to us. Why do I keep saying if it's not in quotation marks? Well, that's because any character in the story can talk. The author can have any character in the story talk. And when that character is talking, there's quotation marks around what they're saying. So for example, we could have a character named Joe, and Joe could say, we could say, Joe said, comma, Joe said, comma, quotation marks. Here are the quotation marks. He would say, I am.
No, he will set the Bluetooth button.
Not in my story. He would say, I am hungry. And then when he's done talking, we put the end quotation marks. So anytime we're using quotation marks, we're always going to have two quotation marks at the beginning, quotation marks at the end, and then in between those quotation marks would be what the person is saying. So whoever is talking is going to say I. So we use quotation marks to show that someone is talking. Inside the quotation marks is what they are saying. So this I is Joe. This I is whoever the author tells us is speaking. So if it says Joe said, then this I is Joe talking. So this is Joe. But if we don't see quotation marks and we see the word I, then we know one of the characters in the story is telling us the story. These pronouns here that I put here for first person, second person, third person, these are the pronouns we would use for the subject of the sentence, the first word in the sentence, the person who is doing something or being something, coming before the verb. But we can also have pronouns at other places in the sentence doing other jobs. And so we might see words, for example, like my, let me try writing that again. I should get an Apple pencil. Like my, or mine, or me. Okay, so when we start reading, we're going to look for these pronouns right here. If we see I, my, mine, me, then we're going to know that one of the characters in the story is the one telling the story. Well, you and I know who that is, but we're not going to give it away yet, okay? So you and I are going to keep a little secret. Okay, so this story starts out by saying, every fall, my dad makes us rake.
The mine.
Good. What else do you see? What other pronoun do you see that would include the person talking? There's one more. I didn't tell it to you. Do you know which one it is?
Dad.
Dad is not me. Let me go back and give a hint. One thing I did here that was a little confusing is, do you remember I said this side would be more than one? If I keep this whole side more than one, then if something is me, but it also includes you, and I'm talking about you and me, then I say we. So if I want to have a first person pronoun, it has to include me who's talking, but it can also include you or someone else. Then I would say we. And you can also be more than one person. Like if I walk into my classroom and I see 10 students and I say, how are you? I'm talking to all 10 students. So you can be more than one person or it can be just one person. So on this side, I'm talking about one person. On this side, I'm talking about more than one person. But the pronouns in pink are first person because these are the pronouns that would be spoken by the person who's talking. So first person and second person means someone is talking to someone else. Third person is when we're talking about someone who's not in the conversation. These are the pronouns we will use if we want to use a pronoun as the subject of the sentence. But there are other pronouns that you might see also that are used in a different way, not as the subject, but for another reason. And those would look like this. I'll still use pink. So you might see, for one person, you might see me, or my, or mine. For more than one person, you might see us, or our. For you, you might see your. For he, she, it, and they, you might see, if it's one person, you might see his, her, hers, its. You might see theirs, their or theirs. So there are lots of different kinds of pronouns, but pronouns can be put into these three groups of either first person, second person, or third person. And then we would look to see, is it the subject of the sentence that's just one person, the subject of the sentence that's more than one person, or is it doing a different job in the sentence? So now that we know more about pronouns, let's look back at this first paragraph and look in the first sentence, and you'll see another first person pronoun. Every fall, my dad, so my is one, makes us rake the yard.
Us.
Yes, that's right. And you can see in this sentence, there is no quotation marks here. So it's the author of the story is not telling us that a character is speaking. Okay, so this means as soon as we see my and us, it means that a character in the story is telling us the story. They're telling us what they see with their own eyes, what they hear with their own ears. They're going to look around them and all the action that they see, the people they're talking to, the things they're listening to, and they're going to tell us all about it. So we say they are telling us the story from their point of view. We call that the first person point of view. So that is called the first person. That's the pink pronouns. Point of view. View is talking about what you see with your eyes. Think about a time when you and your mom and dad went hiking up a mountain. Do you think that your dad would tell the story exactly the same way that you tell the story? No, because you're different people. And he's looking at the hike from his own eyes and from what he sees and what he's thinking about. You are looking at the hike from your eyes and from what you're thinking about. Think about the story of the three little pigs. If one of the pigs told the story and the wolf told the story, do you think they would tell the story the same way? No, because each one is looking at what happens from their own eyes and thinking about how it affects them. So point of view is talking about whose eyes are looking at it, whose brain is thinking about it. When we say first person point of view, we're talking about the person who's the I, the person who is saying, I am going to tell you the story. That person is going to tell us what they see with their own eyes, what they're thinking about in their own head, what they hear with their own ears. And they're going to tell the story in a very different way than another character would tell the story, because everyone sees things differently. Everyone has a different brain. Everyone thinks about things differently. The same thing can happen to two different people, and they will think about it in completely different ways. So now that we have figured out, here comes our secret. Now that we have figured out that one of the characters in the story is telling the story, we have to be on the lookout for figuring out which character it is. Who is it that's telling the story? You and I already know the answer to that question, and we are going to try very hard not to ruin the surprise, okay? Well, let's keep looking for the other pronouns on this page. So every fall, my dad makes us rake the yard front and back. He calls it the big fall cleanup. Now, did you see some other pronouns here? He, and there's one more. It.
Yes.
Anytime the author uses a pronoun, anytime a writer uses a pronoun, they have to make sure that they gave us a clue about who that pronoun is talking about. They can't just say he and she and it unless they have already told us who he is or who it is or what it is. So we need to be able to look back and figure out who every pronoun is. So here it says, he calls it the big fall cleanup. So who's he?
His dad.
That's right. So I'm going to make myself a little note here. So the dad is the he. Now, before we figure out what the it is, I want to show two words. I want to show some pictures for raking and for the yard. All right, so here you can see a picture of a house, and this part right in front of the house, you see some grass and you see a tree and some flowers. This part belongs to the house, but it's not inside the house. It's in front of the house. This is called the yard, right here. And there can be a front yard and a backyard. So here's a picture of a backyard. And so in the backyard of a house, they might have a little pool. They might have a little shed where they put their tools and the tools they use for cutting the grass or taking care of the garden. They might have a place to sit and relax and enjoy the outside. They might have some more grass. They might have some flowers. They might have a playground or a jungle gym or a basketball court. People can decide what they want to put in their backyard. But in some parts of the world, in the fall, that would be the months of September, October, and November, the leaves on the trees turn red and yellow and orange and brown, and then they fall off the trees onto the ground, and the ground gets covered with leaves. And so people will go out with their rake and they will rake up the leaves into a big pile. So when we look at what's happening here at the beginning of this story, it says every fall. So this is probably in October because we know this is kind of a Halloween story. My dad makes us, so that includes the person telling the story and at least one other person, rake the yard, front and back. That means the front yard and the backyard. He, my dad, calls it the big fall cleanup. What do you think it is? What is it that my dad calls the big fall cleanup?
You said that it?
This is a tricky one. What is it that the dad has named the big fall cleanup? It's not really a word, it's more of an idea. So what is happening in the first sentence? Every fall, my dad makes us rake the yard.
The big fall cleanup.
Yeah, raking the yard, the act of raking the yard is called the big fall cleanup. So this is a real tricky one. Raking the yard is
it.
Fall cleanup. That's what it is, right? And then here comes the character telling the story. I call it, raking the yard, something else. Do you think he's trying to be funny here?
No.
He is actually. They're talking about raking the yard. Do you think raking the yard is easy or work?
Work.
It's work, okay? It can be fun work, but it's still work. So every fall, the dad, and we actually learned a good clue about who's telling us the story, because we learned that this person telling the story has a dad, which means this person must be a son or daughter, right? It hasn't told us yet if it's a boy or a girl. So we know that the person telling the story is the son or daughter of this dad who wants this person to rake the yard. Okay, so that means the person telling the story needs to rake the yard, needs to do this work. The dad says, it's the big fall cleanup. The person telling the story says, I call it something else, not the big fall cleanup. So do you think he's going to call it something better or something worse?
Something worse.
Yeah, so he's kind of being funny. He's kind of saying to us, this is not that fun. This is work. I'm not calling it the big fall cleanup. This is like the pain in the neck. So he's being kind of funny here, and he's telling us something about himself. He's telling us that he doesn't really like raking the yard, the front yard and the backyard every fall.
You just said he.
I know. I was wondering if you were going to notice that. Okay. So what we are doing when we are figuring out who is the person telling the story is we are making inferences. Will you cut that out? When we are reading, we have to make inferences. That means we have to be detectives. We need to infer what the author is trying to tell us, but not giving it away. The author is just giving us clues. The author is not telling us everything exactly. We need to look at all the clues and think about what we know and put it all together like a detective, and then we can figure some things out. We made inferences to figure out, for example, what is it? Or who is he? Or if this person has to rake the yard or not. And if this person likes raking the yard or not. When we answered all of those questions, we were making inferences. We were inferring. And so we have been great detectives so far. Well, we are just barely getting into the very beginning of this story. And that is where we are going to pick up next time. So let me go ahead and make our star. Okay. Okay, Archie, it is time to say so long. Cheddar chip. All right, bye, Archie.